Hey everyone, Jason here from Off the Beaten Path, and here we are, heading north out of Walhalla. So stopped there for lunch, started the car up, noticed from the voltmeter that the battery is not charging. Now I'm not going to say I made a good decision here, but the decision I made was to continue heading north towards home and try and generally wend my way through to some towns and get onto some roads somewhere and get as close to home as possible before I run out of charge in the battery. That was the plan. So we headed north out of Walhalla. The road's in pretty reasonable nick, as you can see there. We've had a bit of rain, yeah, I was keeping a pretty sharp eye on the battery voltage, yeah, just heading north. Now we got to this intersection here, so Walhalla Road on the left, which is actually a really nice drive, takes you down past Thompson Dam. I know that now, I didn't at the time. So that's the other thing. I'm in this area that I've never been to before, and actually didn't even research before coming here because this was on the back end of a work trip. If you remember, I had to go to Bairnsdale for work. So we've just turned onto Binns Road. It looked like a main kind of road on the map, and it kind of looped around towards some towns like Aberfeldy and ultimately Matlock and Woods Point. And I really had no idea how big those towns were, other than some of them had fuel signs, and I had heard of Woods Point before. But other than that, I really had no idea, and I was just kind of like, look, we should be able to drive for at least a few hours. Let's get as far as we can get, because I had driven from Wagga back to Albury with the battery not charging. Now, of course, I'd been off-road for ages, and there's all these little bypass tracks that cut over the tops of the hills rather than around the side like the main road goes. So, of course, when your battery's not charging and you've got limited voltage, what do? You take one of the side tracks, don't you? You know, I mean, of course you do. And I wanted to see how slippery it was and what the traction was like, because everything was wet and it looked kind of clay covered. So we said, yeah, let's do that, because it's going to be shorter going over the hill than going around the hill, of course. You can justify just about anything when you want to, can't you? So, and it turns out traction was actually pretty good. If you kept your throttle nice and steady, we really didn't have any issues. And I think these tracks that I was driving on here, I think these are probably the original fire trails that were cut through years ago, and then Binns Road was probably cut through at a later date with a more gentle gradient, and it works its way around the hills rather than over the top, because there's a heap of these that sort of depart from the road and then rejoin right throughout this whole area here. And yeah, it was reasonably steep up to the top, and then it was reasonably steep as well, working your way back down to the actual main road. You can probably get some glimpses there into the distance of exactly what sort of contours are up ahead with the road and the track. And you've heard that saying, you know, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I think that's what happened here. I didn't really have a plan, and it kind of shows, as you'll see throughout this video. I think the smart thing to do would have been to turn around at Walhalla, stay on the bitumen, head south, get back on the freeway, and head home that way. But I was a little bit greedy for an opportunity to get back into the high country, and I tend to have an overly optimistic expectation of how things are going to turn out. So of course it'll be fine. Of course I can cut through the high country in a vehicle where I know the battery's not getting charged. Of course I'll get through in time. It'll be fine. Or it won't. So yeah, back onto Binns Road, and you can see there like this, there's a continuation of what looks like that original track there, but yeah, we've dropped back on the road here and continued our way north. and yeah, it's not too long before we're on a fairly well gravelled, dark gravel road, and we turn left here onto McAvoy's track. And as it says on the screen now, still sort of heading generally north, trying to sort of work our way home as best we can. And yeah, as you can see there, a bit of contour. The road's generally in pretty good condition. And at this point I had decided to take a little bit of a sidetrack down towards the Store Point Hut, because, you know, why not? And I'd also decided that maybe going around on Binns Road, or Springs Road as it becomes, was going to be a little bit too indirect. So I thought, you know what, if I cut down through here, there's some easy tracks. I'll make my way west, I'll get back onto the Walhalla Road, closer to some of those towns over there. That way, if I do run out of charge, I might be somewhere where I can get some assistance fairly readily. That was the thought process. And yeah, as you can see on the screen there, heading down this army track towards Store Point Hut. Right about now, I started to think, was this really a good idea? Because what was I heading down into, and what was I going to have to do to get out of here? And keep in mind, I didn't want to use the winch, because the minute I used the winch, I was probably going to drain the battery and definitely end up stuck. So yeah, presented here with two options, left or right. No idea which is the right one, correct one to take, so decided to take this one for good or for bad. And as you can see, the track kind of just gets steeper and steeper in this section. And what's probably not super apparent on the video footage there is there's a pretty decent sized rock step actually coming up here. More so on the left, the center left of track, than on the right hand side. So I have tried to sort of, excuse me, have tried to sort of work my way around it. That's why I sort of paused there, just trying to reduce the impact of that rock step as much as possible, and get right over to the side. You can see the wheel there drop down. And here's that other line sort of rejoining. I actually think that might have been the easier line, to be honest. I really don't know. And yeah, maybe we'll have to come back and check it out. It's definitely an area in here worth exploring, that's for sure. It was good to see a bit of it, even if it was under a little bit of duress, but certainly was good to see it. And there's a heap of tracks right through here. I think you're probably best served going with somebody if you can. As you know, if and when you get stuck, it does make life a heck of a lot easier. And yeah, chatting to one of the guys that watches most of the videos on the channel, he knows this area quite well, and yeah, he's certainly given me the heads up that there's some very, very steep stuff through here that you could get yourself into trouble with fairly easily if you weren't aware of where you were going. And we're just about through. Little wide section here, again a little bit rocky. But at this point, I'm more thinking about, okay, what's getting through and out the other side going to be like? It's one thing to come down hills like this when they're a bit wet. It's an entirely different thing to actually try and go up them. Keeping in mind too that I run all terrains, not mud terrains. not that I'm convinced there's a huge difference in that, but there's certainly some difference. And I know there's people that will disagree with that quite vehemently. It's like anything. I think it depends what mud terrains you run. At the extreme end of mud terrains, you've got treps and things like that, and then a lot of mud terrains are sort of slightly more aggressive all-terrains. And then there's plenty of those hybrid tyres as well. So just coming towards the bottom of this hill here, Store Point Hut is actually on the right-hand side. You can just probably make it out there through the trees. And at this point, yeah, just pulled up here to have a bit of a look at the hut. There were a few people camping there. And this little track here was not too far away. We definitely passed on this one, as you can see, fairly steep, lots of clay. Just shooting this on the phone, so not the best resolution, but yeah, she was pretty chewed up from some large tyres. Not the kind of fun we were there for today, for sure. So looking at the maps, decided to head west from here to try and get back onto the road that I mentioned, back across to the Walhalla main road north, and it looked like it was going to be a fairly easy drive, and the first section certainly was. It wasn't very long at all before things sort of changed fairly markedly. Now just down here as well, there's a little river crossing, little stream crossing, and off that there's a walking track to the Morningstar water wheel. Now I'm not sure if that water wheel actually survived the bushfires or not, but yeah, it could be worth checking out. These guys that were parked up just there, they were about to head off and do that walk. He had done it before, but not super recently. So that was certainly something that I didn't have time for today, so I decided to keep pushing on. Of course, knowing what I know now about what the electrical issue was in the car, if I'd have just parked somewhere in the sun and let it dry out, it would have been good as gold. But as they say, 20/20 hindsight at this point, we still had no real idea what the issue was, what was causing it, and why it was coming and going. So all I was really thinking about was trying to get somewhere as close to home as possible to minimise the cost of recovery or towing, should that ultimately become necessary. Now this track's getting sort of muddier and muddier as I'm reaching this portion, and I was wondering what was around the corner, and it didn't disappoint. So this is just mud, and it's a two-stage hill, clay, wet. I don't think it gets a lot of sun in there at any time of the year, wet and slippery. Now, because I didn't want to use my winch, I didn't give this a full-on hard go. Possibly I could have got up over that first hump if I did. You can see there, just sliding back. That's just with the brakes on, just sliding back. So I didn't want to get into a position where I was potentially going to have to use my winch to turn the vehicle around again, just with the battery situation that I had. So I tried to sort of crawl it in a controlled fashion, and that was not going to happen. So very quickly said, you know what, let's admit defeat. there's got to be an easier way out of here than using up my battery, trying to winch up this hill, and not knowing what's up ahead. You know, is that just the first of 3 or 4 more hills that are just like that? Really had no idea. So yeah, managed to turn around on this reasonably slippery hill and head back east towards Stall Point Hut. And that was not a very long run. So again, stopped and had a look at the maps and decided, okay, well, let's head east. Let's try and get through to Walhalla. Walhalla has accommodation, it has a service station, and we're actually not that far from Walhalla. So headed east on Donnelly Creek Road, another little stream crossing here of the McAllister Creek. And there's a fairly popular campsite in here as well. I think this is called Concord Gully, maybe. There's a long drop toilet here, and yeah, quite a number of good campsites. And as you can see, there's a few people there camping at this particular time. So it's about an 8-kilometre run here from the hut back out to the Springs Road, which is the northern end of McAvoy's track. So we've done a diversion where we've gone west off McAvoy's track, north down the Army track, tried to go further west, turn around. Now we're heading east back on Donnelly Creek Road, back towards the road we were on earlier, only 3 kilometres further north, and we've done about 20 k's to get there. Such is life. As you can see, this track very quickly turns into, like a lot of high country tracks, on the side of a hill with not a lot of overtaking room. And as you can see, the weather's cleared up and fined up nicely. As it does in the high country, things change fairly quickly. This is actually quite a scenic drive and not a difficult drive. Just obviously need to be aware that the edge of the track's there, and it's not going to be terribly forgiving if you put a wheel off the side of it. And that follows through for a lot of this track, nearly all the way back out to the main road. Again, quite a nice drive, and from what I saw back at the campgrounds, people are bringing vans in down along this road. It reminds me a little bit of McMillan's Road down into Talbotville, similar sort of thing. I'm not sure I'd want to be trying to pass a van coming the other way, but I guess you figure it out if you have to. So yeah, it wasn't too long at all. We're back out on the main road, heading north for just a K or so, and then I decided to take Black Range Road to head east towards Walhalla. So yeah, here we are. We've just pulled back onto Springs Road. So yeah, heading north, and it's not too long at all before we get to Black Range Road. That's the turn off right here to head east to Walhalla. And that seemed like a good idea at the time. Again, I'd had a quick look at the map, and again, I probably didn't stop and think well enough about this, but I saw that there were 2 tracks that came off Black Range Road. One was the Burgoyne track, and the other one was Shane's Bridge track. Now, Burgoyne track, I did sort of note that there was a river crossing, and I didn't probably stop and think about that enough. but it was more direct and it put me closer to Walhalla. So I decided that's what I would do. I would take the Black Range Road track for about 4Ks, turn off and take the Burgoyne track through McAllister River Gorge and out onto Walhalla Road and ultimately to Walhalla. Now, had I actually taken Shane's Bridge track, this would have been a very different video, I think. I probably would have gotten to Walhalla under my own steam, and things probably would have been very different. At the very least, I would have been able to get towed by a normal flatbed tow truck, which would have been considerably cheaper. But that's not what we did. As I said, I've just, I'm watching the voltage go down on the battery the whole time. Getting concerned about how much longer I can keep driving, so looking for the most direct route, and didn't stop and think enough about how high the McAllister River might be, given that we'd had sort of a week of rain. Didn't also stop and think about how steep the Burgoyne track might be, and if I'd looked at the contours on the maps that I had with me, I would have realised the Burgoyne track was very steep down to the river and then fairly steep back up from the river as well, where the Black Range Road around to the top of Cheyenne's Bridge is fairly level. It follows the ridge line, and then Cheyenne's Bridge track is largely downhill to the road. So again, all things that are very clear with the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. And it wasn't too long before parts of this track were fairly wet, fairly slippery, with a fair bit of clay. As I said, we'd had some rain through the day and it had been misting on and off, and the sun hadn't been out all that much, so on the whole the track was kind of wet and slippery. Like this section here, it was definitely wet, definitely slippery. Hit this with enough gusto to try and make sure I had enough momentum to get up it, because once again I knew I couldn't afford to be winching, and fortunately we were able to drive up this section, albeit with the car doing a little bit of work. Like so many times in the high country though, that view when you crest the rise is so worth it, isn't it? And once again, here we are working on that descent down into the McAllister Gorge. And again, you can see some ruts there. It's a sort of a dirt and clay track, and again this was reasonably slippery, so it was first gear, low range, just trying to feather the brakes a little bit to control the speed, because the Padge doesn't have the lowest of low range gearings even in first gear. It's probably one of my criticisms of the Pajeros is first gear low range is just not quite low enough. You can probably get a change of gearing kit for them, like a lot of vehicles, but look, I sort of make do with it the way it is. It's only on really steep stuff that it becomes an issue. When you're descending, you end up using the brakes a little more than you might perhaps like. Now, I don't know how well it's coming through there, probably not that well, but there's a few wombat holes just over that rise. It was kind of loose and rocky and pretty steep through here. And just because of how uneven the surface was, the tyres weren't getting a lot of contact, and it was pretty gnarly coming down here, to be quite honest. By yourself in a vehicle where you know you've got a limited amount of time to be driving into something that you've no idea what you're actually driving into because you've not been there before. But anyway, we kept pushing on because it'll be fun, right? the camera here is really doing how steep the sections of this track are justice, and there are certainly a few rock steps. You can see there in the distance some glimpses of the McAllister River. Now, being this far away from it and seeing how big that was probably the first sign to me that I'd possibly made a mistake in coming this way, and possibly the McAllister River was not going to be passable. There wasn't exactly a lot of places here I could turn around, and at this point I kind of felt like I was committed, and I needed to follow through and at least check it out, because what I definitely didn't want to have happen was to be halfway up one of these tracks and run out of battery power, you know, on a track like this, you know, and be stuck effectively on the side of the hill somewhere. That was that was a big concern and not something that I wanted to happen. So again, I was figuring, well, get down there, check it out. If it's not drivable and I don't think I can get back up, well then we'll just have to set up down the bottom here and figure out how we're going to get out and what that's going to look like. At that time, that's still going to be a lot more preferable to actually getting stuck on the side of this mountain. And yeah, this is kind of the final approach down to the bottom of the gorge. And it doesn't look it, but this was reasonably slippery as well. As I found out when I tried to leave. But that's another story. Honestly, I was surprised I hadn't heard of this area and this track before, but I mean, I think there's so many parts of the high country that we all sort of know our little pocket that we visit a lot, and the other parts we tend not to know quite so well. As people that live close to those areas, you know, the locals there are always going to have their favourite tracks that they talk about that you don't necessarily hear about when you're closer to the northern parts like we are. So we got down to the bottom here, or I got down to the bottom here, and saw this track off to the right. That I was pretty sure that that was not the track to the river crossing, because it looked pretty clear on the maps that you actually needed to cross another little stream before you got to the main McAllister River crossing. So we kept going, and little did I know that this clearing here was going to end up being my camp spot for the night, that I'd be back here. So yeah, pushed on the main track and found this little stream crossing here. This had a pretty gnarly little exit, very rocky, sort of like a vertical rock face with really sharp looking edges on the top of them. You can probably get some of that coming through there, but yeah, it was quite a vertical exit. And then just after we climb up that, we get to this corner here, and yeah, hello, there's somebody coming the other way. Look, there are worse places this could have happened. So there were two vehicles in this convoy. Some young blokes out for the weekend, and they were reasonably local to this area as well. So I did stop and have a good chat to them about tracks. They were actually looking for a hut that's in this area that they'd seen when they'd come into the area, and I was looking for the river crossing to get out. They had come down Burgoyne's the same way as me, so they weren't sure about the river crossing and the exit on the other side of Burgoyne's. So yeah, the 105 there was part of their group as well, so they got the GQ and the 105. So at this point, they sort of went back the other way to look for the hut that they were looking for. I kept going up this way to see what was what it was looking like up here. and the track did get a little bit wetter and a little bit slipperier. Again, I don't think this footage really does it the remotest bit of justice, but you can probably see some of those ruts that have been worked out there, and that's just an indication of how slippery this gets at times. And there was a reasonably tight hairpin here, so I actually pulled off to the side because, again, I was just conscious of my battery and the voltage, and not wanting to get into a position where I had to winch, and not wanting to get stuck somewhere with a vehicle with no power. So turns out the other guys came back anyway. They were still looking for the hut, so I carried on from there and followed them up. Let them know I was having some vehicle issues, and I'm more than happy to help out if need be. So it's not a super long climb over this side after you cross that little stream, and it brings you up to an intersection of about 3 or 4 tracks. So one of which is the Green Hills track, which kind of heads north and ultimately will get you back out onto the Walhalla road, sort of north of Walhalla. And then there was 3 other tracks, one of which was the track to the actual river crossing. So the other 2, one takes you down to the hut, and one takes you down to a bit of a campsite right on the river, on the corner of the McAllister River. So these guys were looking to pick which track they were going to head down in looking for the hut. And in this case, I've sort of elected to follow them, thinking that, well, where there's a hut, there might be a river crossing. So followed these guys down this way, and we did actually find the hut down the bottom here. It's not marked on many maps, but it is intact and hasn't been destroyed by the bushfires, which is great. So some maps you'll see a little asterisk down here next to the McAllister River, but the hut is not necessarily named. And this is a reasonably steep little track down here, and you can see the river there, just centre top of frame in between the trees a little bit. Just down to the left there, that's the river, so we're still a ways up from it here. And again, at this point for me, everything's sort of a bit of a judgment call. It's like, how far do I drive? How far do I commit to going down and investigating a particular line versus you know, just trying to make a good decision in terms of getting out of here, because the voltage kept dropping down and down. By this point, I was down around 10.8, 10.7 volts on the battery. Now, I did have the camera running, but I think the battery must have run out or something when I got down the bottom there, so I got no footage of the river. I got no footage of the hut when I thought I did. But long and the short of it is, we got down to the hut down there, and it looked like that was the river crossing. I've subsequently found out that was not actually the river crossing, but yeah, it was meters wide at that point and deep and flowing. I didn't even want to get in to try and walk it. So at this point, I decided to head up from the hut back up to the junction, and then look to take that Green Hills track north, maybe onto Cobb Spur, and then out to the Walhalla Road or something like that. That was my plan, and that was about to get well and truly ruined. So yeah, still limited battery life, and just climbing back up out of here, you can see these wombat holes, and as the text says, there it is, right there. Just shock loaded that front left CV and it snapped right there and then. If I can actually dig up a photo of that, I might drop that in here. And so after that, I didn't even realise at that point that had happened. I got so much going on, watching the battery voltage. All of a sudden I'm just noticing that the track seems a lot harder than it should be, and I'm not really sure why that is. Again, if I was probably paying better attention, I would have realised straight away why that was. But we're now driving in two-wheel drive. So we're back to this junction, and that is the Green Hills track just there. Ironically, the track on the right-hand side there that I didn't go down, I believe that's actually the track down to the actual river crossing. But yeah, didn't actually take that one. It's about the only one of those tracks that we didn't investigate. I honestly don't think that would have changed things dramatically. I still don't think I would have been driving it, because there was just simply too much water in the river, and it's one thing to get stuck and need a recovery, it's an entirely different thing to lose your vehicle in a river. So didn't want to do that, so was heading on this Green Hills track, and that seemed pretty reasonable till I got to this section and just could not get traction and could not climb up out of here, and as you can see, just basically slid back down, which was pretty freaky. Lost a lot of traction there and ended up sort of stuck. Now fortunately I was in contact with the guys that were down near the hut, and because of how precarious the vehicle was, they jumped on the radio and asked if they could come and give me a hand, which they did.
So yeah, having that bright light behind me is probably not super ideal, is it? Well, we're stuck in the high country. Electrical problems again, that have been intermittent, come and go. I was trying to get through to Walhalla where I could get onto a bitumen road, but massive river. Yeah, massive river between here and there, so that was no dice. Tried to go out by way of a different track. Have now broken the front left CV. That's a good bit of fun. Some young guys here, they got some issues of their own. They're camping a few hundred meters away at a hut. Yeah, some other guys came by, tried to get me out, but it was getting dark, it was getting late, and moisture on the track just, yeah, wasn't viable. So I got two-wheel drive. I'm in the bottom of a ravine about 7 kilometers west of Walhalla. Yeah, and I have no tent. Lost my tent somewhere along the track. Don't know how that happened. Anyway, so yeah, I'll be camping out in the car. Hopefully it'll start in the morning. At least I got the Zolio. That thing's bloody earning its keep. But look, it's not all bad. I've got some lamb cutlets here. So yeah, just cooking up some lamb cutlets. We'll see how these go for tiding me over, and yeah, if we're still a bit hungry, well, we'll whoa, nearly lost that one. I should use utensils, shouldn't I? Anyway, gonna cook these up, eat them up, see if I'm still hungry. Camping tonight in the car, and we'll see what tomorrow brings. So here we are, This is where we stopped last night after the aborted attempt to try and get out of here. So yeah, broken front left CV on the Padge. Weird intermittent electrical issues, meaning the battery's not charging sometimes, so sometimes I just run out of power and stop. Barrel of laughs. And as I think I said in my last video, lost the tent somewhere on the tracks. Guess I didn't tie it on tight enough. So spent last night in the car, making some coffee this morning, about to cook breakfast, got a fire going. It's challenging enough with the wood being kind of wet. So a little river crossing just down there, came through yesterday arvo, and around here is the exit. So that's the exit up there. Yesterday afternoon, when the other group of guys were going to help me, I did get up the first two parts of that just in two-wheel drive, but they were pretty adamant that further up it wasn't going to work, and it was getting late, getting dark, so I get it. So anyway, managed to message some recovery guys. There's some other guys camping over in the hut not too far from here. They did say they'd help me get out today, but they got some issues with their own vehicle, and I think there's two of them. I think they'll need to help each other probably to get out. So bit the bullet, and I'm paying for a recovery again. I'm fairly convinced this is the same electrical issue that stopped us on the border track. I know it wasn't fixed in Adelaide, and I don't think it was fixed at the Mitsubishi dealer in Narracourt either. So anyways, frustrating. But yeah, I've got about 2 hours till I'll get here, presumably. So I'll cook up some breakfast and then get the car packed up, ready to go. There are definitely worse ways to be waiting for a recovery. A couple of cups of coffee, got the fire going, some bigger logs on there now. Cooking up some breakfast, some satay skewers with some salad and cheese in a wrap. Yeah, not terrible at all. It's a bit after 8 AM, somewhere in the next hour and a half to 2 hours. Should be some guys here to tow me out. Looking forward to that. This is that little creek crossing that I drove probably 2 or 3 times yesterday. Not super deep, but check out that exit. Everything looks a lot less slippery than it did yesterday afternoon, so boding well hopefully for getting out. Cracking little spot here. Definitely be a great spot to camp in summer, that's for sure.
So yeah, as I mentioned in those videos, what happened after the other guys helped me turn around and get back down, I stopped over the other side of that little creek crossing there. Car ran out of charge, wouldn't start. Started up a bit of a campsite there. Some other guys came down the Green Hill track, and they jump-started me with a lithium pack, and the car was actually charging. So obviously I'd been out of the water long enough that the alternator was dry enough, because we now know that was the issue, that it was charging. So I was really hopeful the night before that I was going to get out. So we drove through to here. I was only in two-wheel drive, started up the first part of the Burgoynes track. There's about 4 or 5 of those guys. 3 of them sort of went off ahead, and there was one guy sort of hanging back to help me out. We just got the vehicle hooked on after the first 2 stages, and his mates on the radio said, "Oh look, it's getting dark, there's rock steps up here, there's no way you're going to tow that vehicle up, you're going to have to leave it there." And look, I get it. I really think we probably could have gotten out there, but you know, we'll never know. Anyway, hats off to them for having a crack. Yeah, as I said, called the recovery guys, Admiral Towing, and Jesse and the guys from there came out and hooked on, and yeah, look, it was a very different thing today, trying to get out of the Burgoyne's track. As you can probably see from the video footage, the track is a lot drier and dustier. There was no dust yesterday. It was just all wetted down, blue skies, sunshine. So it was like 10:30, 11 by the time they got to me and we got hooked up. So yeah, and yeah, they initially put the jumper leads on the car to put some juice into the battery, which allowed me to start it and drive it. But again, it was not charging, so there was only so far we were going to get. But we did make some good progress. Now the other guys that helped me out yesterday, the guys with the GQ and the 105 series, he actually damaged the fan on his GQ when he came up to help me out. I felt a bit bad about that. They were top blokes, but because of that, his GQ was overheating. We're stuck behind him here a little bit, but they did get out in the end as well, which was good. But that's what I find. Most of the people you meet up in the high country are really helpful. And you know, they'll do what they can if they can to sort of help you out where necessary. So once we got up onto the sort of flat ridge, because I could drive under my own power, we unhooked the snatch strap, and while I could, followed along behind the guys here, and we were able to make a fairly good time. Obviously, when we get to sections like that next climb you can see coming up, that was a no-brainer. I was going to need help up there. There was no way you were driving that in two-wheel drive. And again, I was just conscious that whenever we get up here, at some point here, we're probably going to lose power. And this, you know, the lighting here is a lot better than when I was coming down yesterday. Gives you a bit more of an insight into the Burgoyne's track and what it's like on this western side. And as you can probably see there, it's pretty proper steep and rocky. And if you can't tell, Jesse's car is an 80 series. I didn't get a chance to ask if it was a diesel or a petrol, but whatever it is, it was doing a good job and certainly had plenty of power. Certainly didn't look like he was having any issues pulling us up anyway, that's for sure. So, I actually hooked up my tree protector as a bit of a bridle across the two recovery points on the Pajero. So it was actually after this trip I needed to replace that tree protector because it got fairly well worn out. As you can imagine, several kilometres of towing, dragging through the dirt and gravel on the tracks. So again, here we're onto another section that at this point is largely downhill to flat, so was able to drive this again. And this whole process was reasonably time consuming. But the sections where I was able to drive certainly did improve things and make it go a little bit more quickly. So yeah, we went up the Burgoyne's track, back onto the Black Ridge Range and down Cheyenne's Bridge track. So as I said earlier in this video, and apologies for the length of this, but you know, originally I was kind of going to split it into two videos, but there was no logical split point. I thought, look, I'll just make one long video. You guys can watch as much or as little of it as you want. Yeah, we'd go from there. So here we are turning off Black Ridge Range track onto Cheyenne's Bridge track, and making our way down towards Walhalla Road. Now I didn't get all the way filmed. I basically, I sort of had to pay a lot of attention to what we were doing here, so I wasn't really so much starting and stopping. I actually just started the GoPro recording and just left it recording, and I've just cut it up into to show you the section. So we sort of got as much as we got, which was not all of it. But we certainly did manage to get a fair bit of it, which was good. Getting down the last section of Shane's Bridge track was fairly tricky, because by that point my car was no longer running at all, which meant the brakes didn't have a lot of power, and actually trying to pull myself up was a bit of a challenge. And in the very last sections we did swap around, where they were actually behind me, trying to anchor me and slow me down. So that's the 80 series there, next to an F350 coming the other way. There's not many vehicles that would make an 80 series look small, but that thing certainly does. So yeah, by the time we got down to the bottom of Shane's Bridge track, I was not driving. I was rolling or being towed. So we got down there, everybody had their tyres up. Jesse hung around, and we ran jumper leads off his vehicle onto the patch for a good sort of 15-20 minutes to put some juice into the battery, and that allowed me to start and drive under my own power. And that's it. That's as far as we got. So at this point, we're pretty much at dead weight. So yeah, then Jesse followed me back to Traralgon. We needed to jumper lead a couple more times. Went into the auto parts store at Traralgon, got a solar blanket, and used that to put charge into the battery and limp on my way home, before eventually the battery came good, which I now know is because it was a sunny day, and being on the bitumen, it dried out, the alternator dried out, and the charge was going back into it. And yeah, so hopefully this is the last time for a while that we need to have a recovery done in the high country. So look, thanks everybody for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And yeah, sorry it's so long, but it kind of made sense to tell this whole story in one piece. So if you have watched the end, thanks very much, and I will see you in the next video.